on what is now a historic night for the LA Sparks 365 Network. Good evening, WNBA and LA Sparks fans, and welcome into the LA Sparks 365 Network, your 24/7, 365 comprehensive home of the WNBA, and your two-time WNBA champion Los Angeles Sparks on, as we said, folks, is a historic night here for the network as we have finally surpassed the 100 followers mark on Twitter. But also here, folks, we're here for business tonight to recap Game 2 of the WNBA Western Conference semifinals and chat a bit more about the LA Sparks and their coaching search here on tonight's edition of WNBA 365. Good evening, everybody, alongside Chris Romancy via Apple's FaceTime again from the Heart Studios up in Anaheim, California. Cal McClure joining you folks here from Studio 171 in San Diego. Chris, good evening, man. It's been a very, very historic night here, just about 15 minutes or so before we came on the air, man. We finally had a big milestone, man. Other than that, how's it been going tonight?
Nothing much, just hanging here and everything.
Now, again, folks, in case you didn't catch the part about our historical night, again, folks, we have recently, within the past 15 minutes or so, have recently finally hit the 100 followers mark on the Sparks Network Twitter handle. So we of course, appreciate everybody that has followed us over the entire 6 months we've been on the air, covering the entire league and the LA Sparks. And Chris, like we say a lot, man, here is we're not here just for the Sparks, we're here for the entire league. And to finally hit the 100, Chris, to finally hit the 100 follower mark on Twitter is a pretty big stepping stone, man. Knowing that this network is there's word getting that word's getting around about the network, that it's the only place that you will find WNBA talk on YouTube, on television, or Chris, basically you'll find it anywhere across sports right now, and that it's here on YouTube. And I know that we're having monumental problems with technical difficulties, Chris, that we can still come out here though, man, and in some fashion talk about the league, Chris. And again, to know that the word is getting around from so many great people across the league, man, is very fulfilling for both of us. Would you agree?
Yep, agree.
So, again, folks, thank you very much to the 100 followers on the network Twitter handle. But, Chris, we have some important business to get down to here real quick as we begin here with our opening tip-off headlines here on WNBA 365, Chris, which we had a wild and wacky Game 2 in the WNBA Western Conference semifinals tonight between the Phoenix Mercury and the Minnesota Lynx, Chris, at Target Center tonight in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Chris, in a game that was heavily dominated by the purple and orange for 35 minutes. Have no fear, Maya Moore is here, Chris. She drops 32, and the Lynx come storming back, or I should say roaring back, to take Game 2 at the Target Center by the final score of 82-77. Chris, this game had Phoenix written all over it, and a possible sweep of the defending WNBA champs. 22 in the first, 22 in the second, 18 in the third, and 15 in the fourth for a game total of 77. For the Lynx, it looked bleak early. Only 9 points in the first quarter, and they settled down to play shutout basketball for the last three quarters. 27 in the second, 20 in the third, and the clinching 26 to keep the series alive. Chris, certainly a game that the Mercury certainly let slip away from their fingers. They had Chris, that pretty much owned the Lynx for 35 minutes, and they squandered this game in the last five. Chris, what went wrong for the Mercury in that last 5 minute span where they basically, Chris, gave up a go-ahead 13-0 run to lose this game tonight? What went wrong for Phoenix? And Chris, what went right for the Lynx here in Game 2 to keep this series alive for Game 3 on Tuesday back in Phoenix?
I think the Mercury just ran out of gas towards the end, and the Minnesota Lynx took advantage of it, and everything.
Chris, I think after quarter one, most fans, myself not included, because if you folks remember, I gave the Lynx Game 2 at Target Center tonight, and I still had the Mercury winning Game 3 in Phoenix on Tuesday, and I'm still still thinking about that right now, but my mindset might change a bit, but I don't know if it will. But if you guys recall, though, I did say here, getting it right for once and not having a flop prediction, that the Lynx would take Game 2 on their home floor at Target Center because, Chris, they had played so well at Target Center all season, and Chris, I didn't really think that the Lynx would go down without a fight. Game 1, they looked like they were out of shape a bit. They were very tired and fatigued, and the Mercury took it to them in Game 1. And, Chris, Game 2 was basically deja vu for 35 minutes until that last 5-minute span happened, and the Maya Clinic was open at the right time to get the Lynx back on track, Chris. So moving forward, man, Game 3 Tuesday back in Phoenix, where, Chris, only one team has been able to beat the Mercury there in Phoenix, which was the San Antonio Stars back in early May. I don't know, man. Game 3 is going to be a good one. I really can't think of anything right now as far as a prediction goes, Chris, but what are you thinking about those? We make our way towards Game 3 on Tuesday back there at U.S. Airways Center in Phoenix.
I think it's going to be a great game down the wire, back and head and forth, and come down to the final buzzer, and probably be like 2-point. Someone hits it at the buzzer or something like that.
Yeah, Chris. We're gonna be in for a thrill the next game, to say the least, here when we have Game 3 again, folks. Game 3, Lynx and Mercury, on Tuesday at 7 o'clock, back at U.S. Airways Center in Phoenix, AZ. The game will be televised on NBA TV and, of course, on WNBA Live Access. Now, Chris, as we get to the stats here for this game, real quick, for the Mercury, quickly, Diana Taurasi 23 points, Erin Phillips had 10. Candice Dupree, 18, DeWanna Bonner, 3, Brittany Griner, 14, Taylor, 7, and Misty Bass had 2. For the Lynx, Maya Moore, 32, Simone Augustus, 23, Lindsay Whalen had a bit of a rough day at the office, but came back strong with 17, and across the board, rest of the way down here for the Lynx, Rebecca Brunson had 4, Janelle McCarville, rough day at the office, had 2 points tonight, as did Damaris Dantas and Tan White, all with 2, as also today Monica Wright and Devereux Peters, no points. Now, Chris, one thing that was noted pretty well in that 5-minute span, Chris, was about Eric Bruton, Amy Bonner, and Lamont Simpson, Chris, the three people adorning the orange-sleeved gray tops. That would be the refereeing crew, Chris, who issued out 3 technical fouls in the game, Chris. We'll get to those right now. Now, Chris, we know what's going to happen at this point in time with the usual suspect of the technical fouls in Diana Taurasi. But then, Chris, Brittany Griner follows in her footsteps to take a technical foul as well. And, of course, Chris, it's not a Lynx game without having Cheryl Reeve blow a gasket, Chris. Your thoughts, though, about seeing, Chris, I know this is playoff basketball and the adrenaline's kicked up, though, but I think it's completely unacceptable for there to be 3 technical fouls called in a playoff game, Chris. I know emotions run high in playoff games, Chris, but you got to be a bit more better than that and keep your ego in check, Chris. What are your thoughts, though, about seeing 3 technical fouls issued in this playoff game tonight at Target Center?
No, what just happened tonight?
Chris, I know that there's an old saying, that everything gets ratcheted up and the adrenaline kicks up more in the playoffs, Chris. But the refereeing, Chris, has been a talking point amongst every fan across the WNBA, Chris, from Sparks fans to Rashad Jackson and Kirby and Jessica, who operates the DT Bun page on Twitter, Chris. And I will say the referees have had a bit of a shaky season, Chris. But, Chris, isn't every sports refereeing crew always criticized for missing calls or whatever, Chris? This is nothing new, of course, with sports, that we have 3 people that can't make up their minds about calls, whether they're going one way or the other way, Chris. But I think, Chris, this falls more so on Taurasi, on Griner, and Reeve, Chris, for getting those technical fouls, Chris, because I know that whatever it is about the postseason adrenaline that kicks in all the time, man, but you got to dial it back at some point, man. And we know that Taurasi that Diana is basically the queen of getting technical fouls, Chris. But I don't like, though, how Diana's 10-year experience, Chris, is starting to rub off on Griner now, Chris, where you're supposed to groom them to not be, a split image of yourself, Chris. And now that you have a second-year forward, Chris, also doing the same thing as Taurasi, it's a bit alarming to me that, that a veteran is leading a rookie, Chris, or a second-year player, Chris, the wrong direction here. And Cheryl Reeve, Chris, by gosh, hell, she freaking threw her jacket off in 2012, Chris. There's even a Twitter handle for Cheryl Reeve's jacket, Chris. But again, man, your thoughts, though, about seeing Again, man, 3 technical fouls called in one playoff game. And we know, Chris, that the referees have been tough or pretty much bad all season, Chris. But at this point in time, Chris, can we sort of say, like, kind of like deal with it because it's been happening all season with the refereeing crews all year?
Yeah, just been happening all season. Just step back and let it go.
So again, folks, the Minnesota Lynx, the defending WNBA champs, stave off elimination by the final score of the night of 82-77, making a miraculous comeback in the waning 5 minutes of play to secure Game 3 in Phoenix on Tuesday night. Game time is set for 7 o'clock at the U.S. Airways Center in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, Chris, there is one more game to be played tomorrow in the WNBA Eastern Conference Finals between the number 2 seed Indiana Fever and the 4 seed Chicago Sky. Game time set for 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock tomorrow because of the Labor Day holiday. Chris, the Fever came out and Chris, I think this game could have gone either way because we didn't really get a chance to talk about Game 1 between the Fever and Sky last night. But, Chris, this game, I think, was a seesaw that could have gone either way. Chris, I think the Fever take the series in 3. I don't see them sweeping the Sky, Chris. It could happen, but I'm a betting man saying I give the Sky a win at home at least, Chris. But Chris, your thoughts though? Okay, the Fever win by 7. Is there a reason at all as to why perhaps they won the game? Perhaps is it that they have some veteran leadership, or Chicago is sort of a team that's a little playoff inexperienced? Chris, what do you think is what do you think right now was what do you think was the X factor basically seeing the Fever beat Chicago last night in Game 1 at Bankers Life Fieldhouse? Is it their veteran leadership and playoff experience, or is it because Chicago's a bit too young as far as playoff experience goes right now? What do you think is the big factor right now for Chicago and Indiana?
I think because Indiana is more chemistry in playoffs and everything. Lynn Dunn's final year coaching in the WNBA gives them more push to play really hard for Lynn Dunn, final year, and everything like that.
Now, Chris, last night on the show, we brought up a good point here about, I remember that we had the viewer question asked about, who was feeling the most pressure going into their game 2. And Chris, I think we're right here that the Fever, or the Sky actually, Chris, really it's sort of, they're kind of like shrugging it off about the pressure because again, Chris, they were not favored by anybody, including us two and a few other people, but Shorty Mamba, to get past round 1. We had the dream getting past that series. But, Chris, at this point in time, I think the Fever are just playing with house money. And if they get ousted, Chris, I mean, all they can look back on is, look, we had a strong start. We had a bit of a tough middle part of the year, Chris. We got Elena Del Don back. And, hey, we proved a lot of people wrong about us going far in the postseason. So, again, Chris, your thoughts about the Chicago Sky and your thoughts about Game 2. I mean, do you think the Fever sweep the series? Does it go to Game 3? And also, what are your thoughts, though, about the Chicago Sky's mindset going into Game 2, knowing that, this is sort of, kind of like, whatever about them winning or losing the series?
I think Chicago might get swept because no one picked them to win. They're pretty much like, who cares, because they didn't think they were going to beat Atlanta, the number 1 seed, and they did, so they're pretty much like, whatever. They pretty much might get swept tomorrow night.
So again, folks, tomorrow, Game 2, Indiana at Chicago. Game time set for 1 o'clock Pacific. Game can be seen tomorrow on NBA TV. Now, Chris, we do have a question in our Q&A bar here. Real quick, and we had an overload of questions last night, folks. We appreciate everybody's input last night on our questions. Quick question here, Chris. Viewer is asking, who do you think will get to the WNBA Finals, the Mercury or the Lynx? Chris, it's 2 teams that are destined for greatness. Basically, they've been the cream of the crop of the WNBA Western Conference for the past few years. Again, Chris, this is like the 5th time in 6 years I think I saw that the Mercury, that Phoenix is playing Minnesota for the Western Conference Championship. And, Chris, I think after tonight, I'm on the fence right now between the Mercury and the Lynx, Chris. It's only because two of my players are in between Diana DeRossi and Maya Moore, both UConn alums. Chris, I think it goes either way here. I mean, I think the Mercury have the slight edge because of their dominating home record this year at 16-1 in the regular season and a unblemished record in the postseason at home so far, how they basically Swiss cheese the Sparks in the first round. I mean, I'll look at it this way, Chris, going as I do a lot, Chris, going from both sides of the story here, is the Mercury would be favored by me, Chris, because of their overall season. Their 29 wins and all that stuff and all their records and stuff, Chris. I think that's why I think they favor them, Chris. But I also favor Minnesota, though, because they're battling it out for respect, basically, because that they have been sort of in the shadow of the Mercury all year because the Mercury took the #1 seed, 29 wins, and the Lynx had to, scuffle through a lot of injuries to get back to the 2 seed, Chris, but still had a 25-win season. I think, though, that it's tough to sort of pinpoint, Chris, who's going to win this game because it's going to go either way. It's going to be a seesaw battle, buckle up and hang on for dear life, basically. Be ready to have an ambulance nearby in case you have a heart attack during the game because it's going to be that way, Chris. But again, going from both sides, Chris, I think the Mercury only win because they are just a completely reloaded ball club this year, how they, retooled their entire offense. They have Brittany Griner in her second season, played a phenomenal year, and then stuff like that. And, with Sandy Brondello, Chris, the coach of the year, she has them geared in the right direction. So I think the Mercury more so win, Chris, because they've just I think that they're really destined for greatness. Glory is awaiting the Mercury if they get past Game 3. But then at the same time, Chris, you never count out the defending champions of the league in any sport you play, whether it's WNBA basketball, MASL indoor soccer, or semi-pro collegiate baseball, Chris. You never count out the defending champions. And I gave them, Chris, I called a Lynx Game 2 victory, on the show last night. I said I give them Game 2 at Target Center, Chris, because the Lynx are, Chris, are more so here saying, look, we still have the trophy, in our possession. You have to beat us in Game 3. Sure, it's in your house, but we will play just as hard as we played tonight to keep our championship trophy where it belongs right now in the WNBA, and that right now it belongs in Minnesota, Chris. So I look at it this way. I look at it both ways, Chris. How about you? Who are you favoring and why? And also give us a bit of an insight. Give us a bit of an insight as to why the Mercury would win and why the Lynx would win at the same time.
I think it'll be a back and forth towards the end, changing scores, leads, ties, too many times, and don't know who to choose because two great teams, and that home record, like you said, by Phoenix Mercury, but the defending champions, the Minnesota Lynx, and it's just tough. I don't know, I think I want to say Minnesota because the defending champions, they were down really big toward the end, came back to beat the Phoenix Mercury, the #1 seed, and I think the defending champions will beat Phoenix Mercury and Phoenix, and to move on to the WNBA finals.
Yeah, Chris, I really can't put all my poker chips on one club yet, Chris. I might have to make my decision before game time on Tuesday because, again, Chris, do I favor Taurasi? Do I favor Maya? I don't know where to do because when you have two players on both teams playing, it's tough to figure out who you're going to go with here. This is a game, Chris, that might be like LA Phoenix last year. It'll come down to a final possession. Someone's going to lose by 1, 2, or 3 points. But again, we will get your take, though, folks, on Twitter at LASparks365, at CallumMac3, or at LASparksFan30. Let us know who wins the WNBA Western Conference Final. Is it Phoenix or Minnesota? Let us know on Twitter. And we will take your answers and take your tweets about that during the course of the remainder of the show. Now, Chris, as we get back to the task at hand here with the Los Angeles Sparks again, this, Chris, actually is the first. This is the first full week, Chris, of the Sparks' off season with the teams season ending abruptly in pretty much dominating fashion by the Mercury last Sunday at Staples Center. Chris, as we wrap up the season here, Chris, I know that we posted one of our first ever Sparks infographics that basically, Chris, broke down everything about the season with the Sparks season, man, and it was a pretty sketchy infographic, folks. Now, if you folks did not catch the graphic, you guys can go to our Twitter page at twitter.com and search at LA Sparks 365 and go to our photo links. You guys can actually check out the infographic for the Sparks season. Chris, as I pull this up here real quick, man, the numbers that I crunched in the graphic were basically, the team's overall record, their season splits, okay, so I'm here, so I'll pull it up here real quick. It's a bit tough to see here, so of course I need to, I can't tell what it says, but Chris, this thing basically, man, broke down everything. The overall records, their splits, under the coaches, their total attendance and stuff. I know I tweeted out the link somewhere too, so I'm going to have to just zip through the Twitter timeline here real quick, folks. It's all right. Here we go. So sorry about that, folks. I had to find myself the infographic on the website I was using to make the graphic with real quick here. Chris, as I pull up the graphic here, man, I know I sent you the link in the photo, Chris. And when you saw that graphic about just pretty much how tough the Sparks season was as far as all those splits and numbers go, Chris, I mean, your thoughts about, for one, that I took the time to actually make that graphic for everybody, but at the same time, Chris, kind of how alarming all those season splits were for as far as the record goes, the coaches, and how the points and assists were basically spread across the team, basically.
Yeah, agree. I'm even looking at it right now.
Yeah, I mean, it took me a while because I had to go through a lot of games and stuff. Now, folks, again, if you guys did not catch the graphic, I will resend you folks a link to that during the show here. Now, Chris, as I go to the season splits here for the Sparks, let's go. We'll go each row by row here for season splits, Chris. So, overall home record 7-10, overall away record 9-8, versus the Western Conference 9-13, versus the East, Chris 9-3. So, Chris, as we talk about those numbers, Chris, what stat category, the home record, the away record, the against the Western Conference or the East Conference? Of those four categories, which one of them jumps out to you the most? Is it their home record, away record, their record versus the Western Conference, or their record versus the Eastern Conference?
Yeah. Record on the road.
Yeah, Chris. I think everyone would probably Chris point to the away record because the Sparks were a really different team all of last season when it came to winning games on the road this year. And Chris, I think the one that I'm going to go to as well is the home record, where the Sparks could not defend Staples Center if their lives depended on it. Chris, they went 7-10, 9-13 versus the West. I mean, you can't really expect Chris to go very far in the season if you're going to lose 13 games to your own conference, on top of only winning and of course beating up on the Eastern Conference. Now, Chris, as I move down here to the player department here, which is the bottom three graphs, Chris, if we go to the scoring leaders here, Candace Parker, 19 points per game. Nneka Ogwumike, 15 points per game. Jantel Lavender, 11 points per game. Christy Tolliver, 11.8 points. And then Elena Beard had 8.5. Chris, 30% of the points this year for the Sparks were scored by Candace Parker. To be official, folks, 29% points were scored by Parker, 23% Nneka, 18% Lav, 18% Tolliver, and 13% Elena Beard, Chris. The top five, again, Chris, we'll go by order. So, again, Chris, 19 for Parker. And these are all, folks, by the way, these are actually points per game averages here, which is again, Parker had 19 points, Nneka 15 points, Lavender 11 points, Tolliver 11.8, and Elena Beard 8.5. Chris, as you look at that first chart, man, what kind of sticks out to your mind here real quick, seeing that basically, Chris, 30% of all the points scored for the Sparks, Chris, were from Candace Parker in points per game, And then, Chris, there's a bit of a drop-off because it goes from 19 to 15, 11, 11, Chris, down to 8.5, Chris. So in your mind, what kind of speaks volumes about that pie chart that really shows the point distribution as far as points per game go, seeing that Parker led everybody, but then, Chris, there was a bit of that nosedive where it went from, double digits, Chris, down to a alarming rate of 8.5 points per game from one of the starting five of the team. I said, is it a bit shocking, or is it a bit surprising, or is it a bit frightening to know that 30% of all that 30% points per game went to Candace Parker, 19 points, Chris, but more so it's about the drop-off, Chris. We go from 19 with Parker to 15 to NO, 11 between Lav and KT, Chris, to a staggering 8.5 for Elena Beard, Chris. Are you a bit concerned, though, about that number drop-off in points per game between those five people, those five players that led the Sparks in points per game in the top 5 category?
Yeah.
I think it's a bit staggering, Chris, that you can go from four players down, that you can go from 19 to 11 down to 8 in that quickly. Then, Chris, to the assist chart over here with Candace. Again, folks, all these, by the way, are averages per game that we're using here. So, again, you have Parker at 4.3 assists per game, NECA 4.1. Lindsay Harding got in the top 5 here at 3.2 assists per game, 20%. Elena Beard, 2.5. And Arminty Harrington, 1.9. So, Chris, it looks like everything this year, Chris, was basically Chris, it just looks like this year the numbers were a bit down for everybody, not just for players, Chris, but everybody looked like just had a bit of a down year, Chris, where Candace Parker, Chris, basically led the Sparks in every category as far as it goes with points and assists. And, Chris, we'll go to the team season totals here, Chris. 2,632 points for the whole season, 631 assists, 1,102 rebounds, 308 steals, and only, Chris, a staggering, Chris, the Sparks only had 116 blocks for the whole season total. They also had 308 steals, 1,102 rebounds, 631 assists, and 2,632 points. Chris, other than that, man, as we kind of get ready to wrap up the show here, what were your thoughts though about seeing all the numbers basically, on this infographic, Chris? I actually, Chris, got this idea from the Lakers because the Lakers make infographics about every game recap. So I thought, why not do it here for the Sparks, basically, Chris. Now, real quick, folks, if you guys are wondering about attendance this year, the lowest attendance for the season was the second game of the year when the Sparks played the San Antonio Stars on May 25th. A staggering 5,317 people showed up to see the game, folks. So the overall team high for attendance this year, folks, is the 2014 home opener versus Minnesota, Chris, versus the Mercury, Chris. Chris, the season high for attendance, Chris, is 10,318 people. So, Chris, it's another great year for the Sparks as far as attendance go. Chris, maybe minus that one game with the Stars, Chris. But, Chris, I'm going across the chart here, Chris. Averages of 8, 9, 7, 6, 8, Chris. So it looks like the attendance, Chris, in spite of a bad season, was still up, Chris. And I'll tell you what, man, regardless, Chris, if the Sparks won the title or not this year, Chris, they know their fans had their back. Between having 10,000 to 8 on average, Chris, that they have their fan base to support all season through thick and thin. And, Chris, again, a great season for the Sparks in attendance-wise, Chris, averaging about 8 to 10,000 per game. Your thoughts about the season attendance, Chris, in spite of a very uncharacteristic LA Sparks season?
Just up and down, roller coaster season of the Sparks, and just can't wait for this off season with Magic Johnson giving full control to Candace Parker.
So with that, folks, we will call it a night here. We thank you, folks, very much for watching. Chris, we were in the ballpark tonight of about 4 to 5 people watching tonight, so that was good to see. So, folks, until tomorrow, on Labor Day Monday, we'll come back to you folks tomorrow night with a recap of Game 2 between the Fever and Sky. But until then, folks, have a safe night. Drive home safely. Sober up and designated driver. Have a fun Labor Day holiday. And good night now. This has been the LA Sparks 365 Network. We are Sparks. We are LA. We are the Wnba. For Chris Mancy, I'm Cal McClure, folks. So long. Have a great Labor Day Monday. See you folks tomorrow night. Bye-bye.